The Sumerian mythological heritage is filled with various myths explaining the creation of humans. There are several Sumerian myths detailing the creation of humanity, each attributing human origin and formation to different sources: clay and water, plant origin, animal origin, and divine origin, the word. In this video, we will discuss the first and most famous of these Sumerian myths of human creation, the myth of clay and water, whose main characters are Enki, Namu, Ninma, and the clay of the Apsu. This well-known myth indicates that after the universe and the gods were created, the gods had to work and provide themselves with food and drink. The younger working gods reached a point of exhaustion and suffering, and they went to complain to the god Enki, who was sleeping in the depths of the waters but did not receive them. Instead, the goddess Namu, the first Sumerian mother goddess who bore all the gods, told her son Enki about their complaint, saying, "My son, get out of your bedroom, for you, with your wisdom, understand all crafts. Create a substitute for the gods so they can bear the workload instead of them." Enki, upon hearing his mother Namu's words, rose and entered the sacred hall. He thought deeply, striking his thigh, for he was the wise one who understood everything and all crafts. Enki then created the human's chest and infused his creation, the human, with something of his wisdom. He called upon his mother Namu and said, "Mother, the creature that I have created, bind to it the work of the gods. After you mix the clay taken from the waters of the Apsu, you must shape the clay and create the creature, human, and may the goddess Ninma assist you." After deciding the shape and nature of humans and imparting some of his wisdom into them, Enki left the matter of their birth to Ninma and the 7 birth goddesses who assisted her. From this description, humans appeared, and Enki decided their shape, nature, and soul, then placed them in the womb of one of the goddesses, probably Ninma, to be born with the assistance of the birth goddesses. Namu then determined their fate, while Ninma decided the work they would do for the gods. Enki then held a celebration for the gods to show them the birth of the new creature, human. The goddess Namu created the initial mold, and then the goddess Ninma took the clay from the waters of the Apsu, after she and Enki had drunk much wine, shaped it, and gave birth to it. It seems she created 6 types of humans, all suffering from some form of weakness or illness, but Enki decided a fate for each of them. These early humans were: 1. The stiff-jointed human. Enki made him serve the king. 2. The blind human. Enki made him a singer and musician for the king. 3. The crippled human. Enki made him beautiful and extraordinary. 4. The man who couldn't retain his semen. Enki washed him and he was healed. 5. The barren woman. Enki assigned her to the harem. 6. The human without genitals. Enki named him Nibru eunuch to serve the king. Enki then created a human creature with the help of Ninma, and this creature was called Umul. Umul was barely able to breathe, his ribs were shaking, his lungs were afflicted, his heart was troubled, and his intestines were affected. His head hung down, and he could not put bread in his mouth. His spine and head were twisted, his shoulders collapsed, and his legs could not walk. It seems Enki deliberately created such a deformed human to embarrass Ninma and prove her inability, after he managed to determine the fate of 6 other primitive human types she created. Thus, he told her to manage this creature and assign it a fate and a means of living. Ninma then turned towards Umul and observed him. She approached and called him, but he could not respond. She offered him bread, but he could not eat it. He could not sit or stand, nor could he make himself a shelter or find food. Therefore Ninma responded to Enki, "What you have created here is neither alive nor dead. It is incapable of doing anything." Enki reminded Ninma how he had provided a means of living for the humans she created and assigned them a fate. Ninma justified her failure by explaining that she had left her city and temple due to an attack and had to take refuge in Enlil's temple in Nippur. However, her failure was evident. Enki then asked her to remove the incapable creature from her embrace, accept the creatures she created after he decided their fate, and celebrate his creative ability by singing for him and building a special temple for him. This myth illustrates Enki's ability to create ordinary, healthy humans without explaining the exact process, then shows how Ninma created 6 types of disabled humans, and how Enki assigned them roles and healed some of them. However, Ninma failed to help Enki's deliberately created disabled creature. This myth also suggests that the first humans were sick and physically flawed, and without Enki, they could not have survived. Additionally, it indicates that humans were created by Enki, but born by a goddess with the help of 7 birth goddesses. This is a significant indication that humans are considered children of the gods or goddesses, but weak and mortal, tasked with serving the gods and fulfilling their commands rather than living with them or sharing their attributes. We discussed in a previous video the first and most famous Sumerian myth of human creation, which is the myth of clay and water. The protagonists of this myth are Enki, Namu, Ninma, and the clay of the Apsu. However, there are other lesser-known myths about the beginning of human creation, one of which is the myth of Enlil's grasses. In this myth, we see a different approach compared to the previous one, where the god Enlil places the beginnings of humanity, its seeds, in the cracks of the earth. Humans then begin to emerge from these cracks like grass. The concept of this Sumerian myth attributes human creation to the god Enlil, rather than Enki, which does not align with the known functions of Enlil and Enki. Therefore, it is possible that this myth originates from a distant time before Sumerian religious beliefs and mythology were precisely established. In fact, it dates back to a distant place and time, around 5000 BC, when the ancestors of the Sumerians were in the northern part of the Mesopotamian Valley, in and around the Samara region. During this period, ancient Iraqis practiced agriculture relying on rainfall, and the appearance of plants resembled grass. In this stage, the beginnings of the male god appeared, represented by the air, which corresponds to the god Enlil, who controls the rain. Below is an excerpt from the myth called the Myth of the Hoe. Lord God, Enlil, may everything that is useful appear bright. May the Lord whose determination of fate cannot affect. May he hasten to separate the heavens from the earth, and he hasten to separate the earth from the heavens. And then a document in Ozomua. The first human appeared, and he dug. He made a rip in the ground and in the area of Duranki, and created the hoe. The day ended. And he decided the duties of work and decided the fate. And the handle of the hoe and the handle of the work are fixed. The glory of God. The night is his hoe, that is, the one who created him. And he brought the hoe to Uzo-Aya and placed the beginnings of man in the cleft. And when humans began to appear like weeds from the earth, the god Enlil was at ease with his Sumerian people. And the god Alununa stood beside him, putting her hands on her mouths, offering prayers to the god Enlil, and placing the hoe in the hands of the Sumerian people. This myth, often called the myth of Ashnan, Nisaba, describes the early appearance of the great gods on the mountain of heaven and earth when nothing had yet been created, neither the lesser gods nor animals like the ewe, nor grains like barley. In that primordial time, humans knew nothing, and it seems to us that they were created on the sacred hill of the universe, Anki, before the separation of the sky from the earth, in other words, before the appearance of the gods. Humans appeared like the universe from the primordial watery abyss, but they appeared as animals walking on their hands and feet. Here is an excerpt from this myth. After on the mountain of heaven and earth, An, the heaven god, had caused the Anunnaki, his followers, to be born. Because the name Ashnan, the grain goddess, had not been born, had not been fashioned, because Utu, the goddess of plants, had not been fashioned, because to Utu no temenos had been set up. There was no ewe, no lamb was dropped. There was no goat, no kid was dropped. The ewe did not give birth to its 2 lambs. The goat did not give birth to its 3 kids. Grain of 40 days did not exist, because the name of Ashnan, the wise, and Lahar, the cattle god, the Anunnaki, the great gods, did not know. The grain of 30 days did not exist. The small grains, the grain of the mountain, the grain of the pure living creatures did not exist, because Utu had not been born, because the crown of vegetation had not been raised, because the Lord had not been born, because Sumugan, the god of the plain, had not come forth. Like mankind when first created, the people of those days did not know about eating bread. They did not know about wearing clothes. They went about with naked limbs in the land. Like sheep, they ate grass with their mouths and drank water from the ditches. In those days, in the creation chamber of the gods, the produce of Lahar and Ashnan, the Anunnaki of the Dulcug eat, but remain unsated. In their pure sheepfolds milk, and good things, the Anunnaki of the Dulcug drink, but remain unsated. For the sake of the good things in their pure sheepfolds, man was given breath. Thus, the gods of the ewe and barley, Lahar and Ashnan, descended from the sacred hill to the earth, bringing with them humans who went along. The gods had created cattle and grain, and created humans along with them. They found that the gods were still struggling to obtain their food and drink, so they sent the cattle, grain, and humans to earth so that humans could benefit from them and, in turn, serve the gods who needed servants. The myth illustrated how humans were initially animals walking on all fours and did not eat bread because they did not know how to make it. They were naked because they did not know about clothing. Their food was grass like that of animals, and they drank water from the channels, while the ewe ate barley and drank sweet water, but never felt full or quenched. Therefore, they descended to earth to teach humans these things and make them perform these tasks instead of the gods. The myth of Lahar, the cattle god, and his sister Ashnan, the grain goddess, offers a fascinating insight into Sumerian mythology, echoing themes found in the Near Eastern Cain-Abel motif. Created on the sacred hill by Enki, and with their destinies shaped by Enlil, Lahar and Ashnan were brought into existence to provide the Anunnaki, the children and followers of the heaven god An, with essential sustenance and clothing. However, the Anunnaki could not effectively utilize their gifts, leading to the creation of humans to fulfill this need. Initially, humans were portrayed as beings who roamed and consumed like animals, devoid of clothing, reflecting their primal and unrefined state. This view underscores the Sumerian belief in the early human condition, much akin to sheep, underscoring a humble and rudimentary existence. As Lahar and Ashnan's contributions of cattle and grain grew, they brought immense prosperity to the assembly of gods. Yet their success bred conflict, as the siblings indulged in wine and quarreled over their fields and produce, each vying for superiority. This discord necessitated the intervention of Enlil and Enki, who ultimately resolved the dispute by declaring Ashnan, the goddess of grain and agriculture, as superior to Lahar, the god of cattle. The myth highlights the essential role humans played in bridging the gap between divine gifts and their practical application. Humans were created to utilize the bounty of Lahar and Ashnan effectively, transforming their primal existence into a more structured and purposeful life, capable of managing agriculture and livestock. This narrative not only underscores the significance of human creation, but also illustrates the evolution from a simple, animal-like existence to a more developed state, vital for sustaining the divine order. In essence, the tale of Lahar and Ashnan encapsulates the Sumerian worldview on the creation and purpose of humanity, highlighting their pivotal role in ensuring the sustenance and prosperity of the gods through the effective management of cattle and grain. The passage following the introduction is another poetic gem. It describes the descent of Lahar and Ashnan from heaven to earth and the cultural benefits which they bestow on mankind. In those days, Enki says to Enlil, "Father Enlil, Lahar and Ashnan, they who have been created in the Dulcug, let us cause them to descend from the Dulcug." At the pure word of Enki and Enlil, Lahar and Ashnan descended from the Dulcug. For Lahar, they, Enlil and Enki, set up the sheepfold, plants, herbs, and they present to him. For Ashnan, they establish a house, plow and yoke they present to her. Lahar, standing in his sheepfold, is a shepherd increasing the bounty of the sheepfold. Ashnan, standing among the crops, is a maid kindly and bountiful. Abundance of heaven, Lahar and Ashnan cause to appear. In the assembly, they brought abundance. In the land, they brought the breath of life. The decrees of the god they direct. The contents of the warehouses they multiply. The storehouses they fill full. In the house of the poor, hugging the dust, entering they bring abundance. The pair of them, wherever they stand, bring heavy increase into the house. The place where they stand they sate. The place where they sit they supply. They made good the heart of An and Enlil. But then Lahar and Ashnan drank much wine, and so they began to quarrel in the farms and fields. In the arguments which ensued, each deity extolled its achievements and belittled those of its opponent. Finally, Enlil and Enki intervened, but the end of the poem which contains their decision is still wanting.